And I was thinking about how odd it is this year that we had such late tornadoes. 6 a.m., 5 a.m. tornado warnings in November is odd. And I've been in Oklahoma all my life. And that's, any tornado is odd, but a tornado warning at like 5 or 6 in the morning in November is completely unexpected. We have faced so much chaos in the last 18 months that it's kind of jarring to the mind and just kind of spins our heads. If you think about inflation, if you think about people worried about their jobs, losing their jobs to artificial intelligence, if you think about just the state of world politics and global politics, and you think about the wars that have broken out and all of the chaos in our world, it can just be overwhelming. And in the midst of chaos, in these very troubling times, we actually hunger for something. We hunger for good news. We want there to be good news. And sometimes it feels like it's really difficult to find any good news. The world is constantly throwing us for a loop. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you turn on anything from the 3 main channels to the other cable news networks to your own algorithms in your social media feed, good news doesn't rise to the top. What rises to the top is the crazy-making stuff. And there's actually a lot of good going on in our world. There's a lot of good things going on in our world. And some of the organizations we work with have talked about how infant mortality has been decreasing every single year. But when's the last time you saw a news story on that? Right? There's a lot of good things going on. You're a part of a lot of good things going on in our world. But for some reason, the world just likes to throw us for this loop and keep us hooked on chaos. I want to talk on this first Sunday of Advent. We lit the candle of hope, and so I want to talk about hope. I want us to focus in on this idea that yes, it's easy to lose hope, but Jesus came into this world to bring hope. And that's why Christmas and this season of Advent, as we lead into it, are essential. If you haven't gotten one of these yet, I want to just make one more plea for you to grab one of these on your way out today. These are completely free. This is an Advent guide. And it has a devotional for every day of Advent leading up to Christmas that you can do, and a weekly review. Completely free to you. It's called A Time for Wonder. These actually sold out. I got them early. They sold out at the national level. And so the ones that we have, we can't reorder anymore. We have a few left on the table as you leave at the very front door. We also have a digital copy that they've given us the rights to use, a PDF that we can share with you as well, and I've been sending out by email. But this is a beautiful guide, a beautiful way to really let Advent be what it's supposed to be, a preparation for the coming of Jesus. And so that's what we're going to do in this series too, is kind of walk through this way of thinking about the times we live in, the chaos we live in, but also rediscovering. And I want to focus in week 1 here on rediscovering the hope that Jesus brought into the world. There was a world that was in chaos. I mean, they had been hungering for the Messiah for generations. And they had gotten to a point where they'd almost given up. And many had given up. And yet, Christ came into this world to bring that hope that God had promised. So, let's rediscover Christmas together. In Hebrews, it says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. It reminds us that no matter how uncertain times feel, no matter how bad it gets in the news, no matter how bad it gets at work or in your personal life, no matter what stress you're going through, Jesus is unchanging, and he's right there for us. I know I've heard people talk about God feeling far away, and I try to remind them that God never moves, that God is always in the same position. It's us who walks away. It's us who pushes back, but he's always available to us, and he's always steadfast and unchanging and right there in the same place. So, as we think about this, and I think this is very curious language used in Hebrews here, he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. The Bible is quite clear that Christ was around even in creation, that the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us, is what it says in the New Testament. But in the Old Testament, it tells us that he was there at the very beginning of all things, that he's not a new creation of God, that he's been there the whole time. And he is the same. He is there for us. So today I want to dive into the New Testament's accounting around the origin of Christ becoming flesh and dwelling amongst us. And there is scripture in Luke chapter 2 where it talks about these two people. And I want to focus in on these two people today because I think their story is really unique. Simeon and Anna, a prophet and a prophetess. And they basically had waited their whole lives for the Messiah. And they had kept teaching about the Messiah coming. They'd kept talking about it. And yet their lives kind of got worse and worse and worse. They lived under the very oppressive Roman government. And if you know anything about the Romans, if you've read any history or you remember history from high school, you remember the Romans were awful people, like just tyrants and terrible to Christians. In fact, the Colosseum commonly held the deaths of Christians at the hands of either barbarians or animals, right? They would just feed them, just for entertainment, they would feed them to the animals. And so the Romans hated Christians. And what you see here is the launch of what would become the Christian movement with Jesus, right? And so you see these awful, terrible people, and Simeon and Anna living here, holding on for generation after generation, hope that God would send his Messiah. And yet, hadn't done so yet. And so perseverance in the face of difficult times is what we see there. These two actively worshiped God and encouraged others to worship God. Simeon is called a prophet, and he is going around and teaching, and we'll learn about him in just a moment. And Anna is not a passive bystander. She also is talking about God and actively worshiping God and serving others in the name of God. And so their hope, what they held close to their heart, wasn't just a feeling. It wasn't just like we say, I hope the Thunder make it to the finals this year, right? That's kind of a jokey language we use with the word hope. And so we kind of have just a temporary usage of the word hope. We just kind of throw it out there. The word hope used here is not that kind of hope. This is about an assurance based on their faith in God of who he is, his character, about what he was going to see done in their world. And so let's start Luke chapter 2. Verse 22 starts to kind of set this up. It says, "Then it was time for their purification offering as required by the law of Moses after the birth of a child. So his parents, as Jesus' parents, took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. And the law of the Lord says, if a woman's first child is a boy, he must be dedicated to the Lord. So they offered the sacrifice required in the law of the Lord, either a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. And then at that time there was a man in Jerusalem named Simeon. He was righteous and devout and was eagerly awaiting for the Messiah to come and rescue Israel. The Holy Spirit was upon him and had revealed to him that he would not die until he had seen the Lord's Messiah. That day the Spirit led him to the temple. So when Mary and Joseph came to present the baby Jesus to the Lord as the law required, Simeon was there. He took the child in his arms and praised God, saying," and they call this the hymn of Simeon, okay? So imagine that. These are the words he says. He says, "Sovereign Lord, now let your servant die in peace as you have promised. I have seen your salvation, which you have prepared for all people. He is a light to reveal God to the nations, and he is the glory of your people, Israel." Jesus' parents, it continues, were amazed at what was being said about him, about Jesus, referring back to Jesus. So they're amazed about what this guy is saying about Jesus. And then Simeon blessed them, and he said to Mary, the baby's mother, "This child is destined to cause many in Israel to fall, and many others to rise. He has been sent as a sign from God, but many will oppose him. As a result, the deepest thoughts of many hearts will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your very soul." So obviously Mary is hearing all this, and she knows kind of what's going on, but this is heavy to hear. Your child's going to be loved and he's going to be hated. He's going to rise up people, and people are going to fall because of him, and people are going to oppose him. And many people we're going to know who they really are by the way that they treat this Jesus. And then Anna comes in verse 36. Anna, it says, a prophet was also there in the temple. So she's also waiting for Jesus. She was the daughter of Phanuel from the tribe of Asher, and she was very old. I read something this week that said scholars saying she's at least mid-80s at this point, probably older. And her husband had died when they'd been married only 7 years. And then she lives to 84. So the translators have made a lot of notes on this. We don't know exactly where they start counting her age, but she's very old. One said over 100. One, we don't have an exact knowledge there. And the other interesting thing about Anna is we have Simeon's teachings. We don't have a lot of her teachings. All it kind of gives us is an overview, a Reader's Digest version of what she was doing. It says she never left the temple, but she stayed there day and night worshiping God with fasting and with prayer. And so she's very dedicated to waiting for the Messiah. Verse 38 says, she came along just as Simeon was talking with Mary and Joseph, and she began praising God. And she talked about the child to everyone who had been waiting expectantly for God to rescue Jerusalem. And so we have two people here, really unique stories that we don't hear a lot about usually. Everybody is consumed with the other stories, and we're going to dive into all those stories around the Christmas narrative. But I think these two are really unique because what you see here are two very old people who'd been waiting their whole lives for Jesus, filled with hope, living under oppressive rule, living under terrible government, living with just this fear. And then they get to be a part of the generation that witnesses God's great gift. And it causes both of them to declare this truth. And they get a sense that their hope wasn't just something that would be far, far off, but that they would get to be a part of, they would get to participate in. I love what Max Lucado has written. He said, when Christ was born, so was our hope. Our hope was born when Christ was born. It was delivered to us. God delivered hope to us. And not a fleeting hope, not a temporary hope, but an eternal hope. And we were waiting. The whole world was waiting. And so when that star shone in the sky and the people saw that, they got a sense that God had delivered on the promise that had been for thousands of years talked about. Sometimes when you get older like me, I don't know, it's a sliding scale. I feel old, especially when my back cracks like 10 times when I get out of bed. I feel really old. Or when I hurt and I didn't do anything the day before. I just sat, I sat and played video games and I'm like, oh, my back hurts, like I lifted something. But when you get old, you get a little more contemplative, I think. And questions start to bounce around in your head. What is the meaning of life? What is my purpose? Why are we here? And I feel like, and I have talked to you about my mornings sometimes, my morning routine. I'm a very early riser. I like to get up and have coffee, and I like that to be a quiet moment. Some of you are, I'm not big into meditation, but I am into prayer. And so I like to have quiet moments where I pray and talk to God and read the scriptures. But I'm finding more and more of those moments, those contemplative moments, I do ask those questions. And maybe it's approaching kind of midlife and thinking, okay, what else is there? What have I been on the right track? Do I need to make course corrections? Right? Questions we all ask from time to time. But I think these questions become even more pressing when life feels very unstable, right? Chaotic. When the world is in chaos. These questions feel like I don't have a lifetime to answer these questions. I need to answer these now. And the Christmas story gives us clear clues, if you will, breadcrumbs that lead us to the truth that we are here primarily because God loves us and has a plan for each of our lives. And it's twofold. He has broad plans for all of humanity that we all fit into. And then he has specific plans for you that are different than the plans he has for me. So in a very broad sense, we are here to love God and to do good. We are here to love our neighbor as ourselves and love the Lord our God. That's it. That's the broad sense. Now within that, there are a lot of ways to accomplish those goals. And that would be more specific, the plans God has for you. And the thing that I think about hope, that I key in on so much about that word in particular, is that hope is understanding the presence of God. That when we are in the presence of God, we feel his hope. They can say whatever they want on the TV or radio or your social media feed, but when we come into the presence of God, that hope is so overwhelming that it crowds out those other voices. God's not trying to sell us anything. God is trying to fill us with something beautiful and wonderful and awe-inspiring, hope that transcends this moment. One of the things that drew me to church as a young boy was that church was for everyone, that everyone was welcome, that it didn't matter if you had a lot of stuff, it didn't matter if you were popular, it didn't matter if people liked you or people didn't like you, it didn't matter if you thought well of yourself or you looked in the mirror and you were just critical of yourself. None of that mattered. That church was unique of all of the organizations, of all of the groups of people and gatherings of people out there, in that everyone was welcome. It reminds me of one of my all-time favorite Christmas movies, the 1964 classic, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and the island of misfit toys. And I think sometimes in all the abominable and all the snow and frosty and all that, we forget about this little tidbit stuck in the middle of this beautiful children's animation. Is there's a story of the island of misfit toys. And if you feel like a misfit, I know that at different times in my life I have felt like a misfit. I think it's perfect, this analogy, for what the church was created for. It was created for those of us that feel like maybe misfits. Jesus didn't fit into his society very well and was indeed a misfit. The disciples were misfit. Paul, who wrote 2/3 of your New Testament, misfit. It's a place that's refreshing because it's not a country club. It doesn't have a high bar of entry that a lot of people can't get into. It doesn't have a dress requirement. It doesn't have a way of acting or looking or being. It doesn't have a race requirement. It doesn't have a socioeconomic component. It is just, you are welcome here. Church is where we can drop the masks and say, I'm at the end of me. I have reached my end. And yet, in my chaotic and troubling world, I'm hungry for something that goes beyond. I'm hungry for some good news in these troubling times. Now, your experience of church may not be that way, and I fully appreciate that. Because church is filled with humans, and we're messed up. We're broken. And many times, we mess things up. But the beauty is that if we understand none of us are perfect when we come together in this way, and that we live in a chaotic world, we live in troubling times, what we will find in the presence of God, in the arms of Christ, is hope. His desire for us, even expressed incredibly imperfectly and chaotic in our own way through the expression of the local church. But it is that place that is beautiful because Jesus offers us something that we can't get anywhere else. Jesus says it this way, be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. The word Emmanuel that we talked about the last couple of weeks means God with us. And it is one of the names of Christ, God with us. Jesus himself here using that same language, I am with you. Even then, even the disciples closest to Jesus, walked with Jesus, saw him do miracles. He needed to reassure that he was with them, even when he wasn't with them. So, it's no wonder that 2,000 years later, many people question, doubt, struggle. We have not walked with Jesus on this earth. We have not seen him perform miracles. And so it's no wonder that we struggle with doubt and with self-doubt. It's no wonder that we struggle with understanding. And it's no wonder that we need the reassurance that we find in the scriptures here. Jesus is with us. That's why we sing. People say, why do you sing the same songs every Christmas? It's like, because we need to be reminded. It's like looking in the mirror. Sometimes I forget what I look like, and I look in the mirror and I go, oh, got to fix that. Got to get that right. Oh, that hair's out of whack. I always have hair out of whack. I got so many cowlicks. And so we need to remind ourselves. So it's important to remind ourselves that God is with us when we hit that low, when we have that work conflict, when our relationships aren't going the way we wanted, when our finances are just blown up, when we're hurting in grief and lonely. God is with us. That's powerful. That changes our perspective. We can't fix all those situations. We can't mend relationships if someone is not willing to go halfway and meet us halfway, right? But what we can do is everything that we can to mend the relationship and then realize God is with us in that moment. In that moment of hurt and pain and loneliness, God is with us. If you feel like you're stuck in chaos, remember God is with you. Billy Graham said it this way one time. He preached, "Earth's troubles fade in the light of heaven's hope." And Jesus is heaven's hope. Jesus is the plan God had for us to be instilled with hope. And no matter what's going on in your world right now, no matter what you're feeling, no matter what emotion is overriding all others, you can have hope. Hope illuminates the darkness. It soothes the chaos. Simeon and Anna, these prophets, found out and experienced firsthand what that overwhelming, can you imagine? The scriptures are clear in the Hebrew Bible, just generation after generation of longing for the Messiah. And then Jesus appears. And they got to be a part of that. They got to announce that. And you can experience that same moment of clarity that the Simeon and Anna had, that same moment of hope, when it takes you from where you're at right now, stuck in chaos, to being filled with hope. That can happen for all of us. This year is going to be my year that I remember as the year that I beat back diabetes a little bit. If you don't know, I was diagnosed in May of 2023. I just went in for a regular checkup. I didn't feel bad or anything, and my blood sugar was out of control. And my doctor was like, "I need you back in here right away. We've got to get you started on insulin, daily insulin. We've got to knock this down." My A1C was like 13 something, and my blood sugar was like, my fasting blood sugar was like almost 400. It was just wild. And so I didn't know anything about any of that stuff, never had any experience with any of that. So I started daily insulin injections, had to start altering how I ate. And then this year, 2024, probably is also going to be my year of kidney stones because I've had 2 operations this year for kidney stones. So I'm just like done with the doctors and the hospitals and stuff. I don't want to go back anymore. I went for my second kidney thing, and one of the nurses recognized me. And I'm like, you don't want that. You don't want nurses to recognize you. Like, "Hey, Clark." No, no, ma'am. Do not say that. And my doc, knowing me, but I have my doctor's cell phone number. I'm like, no, I don't want your number. I don't want to know this. No, this is bad. So it's kind of a wild year for me. And it did alter kind of how I prayed this year about getting better and getting through that. And some dark days where I was like, this is a lot. I don't want any more of this. And hope kept me thinking differently. It helped me to learn to live differently and to keep my eye on what was important. And keeping the main thing I've heard said before. I think that's so important. Because through the medicines and through the side effects, I just kept thinking, I want this to be over. And I don't want to feel like this anymore. And hope, what I like about hope is that it's not just wishful thinking, right? There's a lot of books out there, especially at the new year, they're like, make your mind positive. And it's like, no matter how much you tell yourself to be positive, does that really change that? Most of the time, not. It's not you might make yourself smile like a crazy person for 5 minutes, but can you really make yourself feel joy if you're feeling just rotten? I don't think that's possible. It's not for me, at least. But hope is different. Hope is not wishful thinking. Hope is a catalyst for action. It's based on something bigger than yourself. Hope based on Jesus means that I'm not basing it on what I can manifest, what I can put out into the world, but it's based on what he's done for me. It gives me the courage to dream bigger dreams. It gives me the courage to take risks and to take that step forward, even if it feels like the smallest baby step. It gives me the courage to take that step today. And this is the kind of hope that we're offered at Christmas. And this is why some of your favorite Christmas songs, at least they're my favorites, I love the classics, remind us of this over and over and over. And sometimes it feels a little bit, if you get tired of listening to Christmas music, you're like, I've heard this song a million times. But that's important. That repetition's important to remember and to remind ourselves. I read one time C.S. Lewis, he said, once in our world, a stable had something in it that was bigger than our whole world. He said this tiny little stable had something bigger than our whole world because the stable is where Jesus came. And so hope was born in that. One of my favorite songs, "Oh Holy Night," I can't sing it. If you ever hear me singing here, I'm sorry. I try to sit on the front row and aim it towards the loud music. I can't stay in any key for very long. But I love to sing, and I love this song, "Oh Holy Night." And I think one of the lines of it is amazing. A thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices. And that's what we focus in on this first Sunday of Advent, just how hungry and hurting and chaotic our world was and how much they were waiting for Jesus. And Anna and Simeon, what we see in their story is they were just ready to go and tell the good news that Jesus was here because so many had been waiting for so long. What if we give up on chaos this year? What if we say, yeah, hope was born into this world through Jesus. And so I give up on chaos. I give up on figuring it all out myself. I give up on trying to manifest everything myself. And instead, I'm not going to stress out this year. I'm not going to judge myself so harshly. Instead, I'm going to lean on Jesus and experience for myself what Anna and Simeon experienced. Experience for myself the thrill of hope, real hope. Not temporary hope, not wishful thinking, but real hope that comes from Jesus. This Christmas, I want to encourage you to choose hope. No matter what's going on in your life, no matter what you feel the world state of affairs is, to choose to have hope. Choose to believe in the power of God to work in your life. Choose to believe in your ability to put your faith and trust in Jesus. Because God can bring good even in troubling times. And this is my prayer for you from Romans 15:13. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. That is real power. That's real hope. And that's where it begins. Who do you trust in?